to answer the question here in the chat. Yeah, I think so. This talk's kind of going to be geared towards a little bit of a range of people. You know, at the end of it, it's not, you know, it's not 0 to expert. It's let me teach you how to fish. And I'm going to show you some cool things that you can apply to your job today. And I'm also going to show you how to kind of find the resources to get you where you need to be in your role, because, you know, the technologies you touch every day are going to be different than what I touch. And so the goal is to kind of at a high level, teach you how to get where you're trying to go. Hopefully that answers the question, but we're gonna show you how to install PowerShell 7 if you don't already have it. We're gonna install Visual Studio Code, and walk through a lot of the basics and touch some other high-level subjects.
Yeah, that's been a, well, for a lot of new beginners, that's been a thing. And when we interviewed out at the PowerShell Global Summit for our podcast, so for those of you that are new and may not know about it, I run the or I'm the co-host of the PowerShell News podcast. We haven't done any episodes here in the past few months. We've both been swamped. My co-host is a Microsoft employee and he started a new position. He's been pretty swamped, but we're actually going to do our next episode at the end of this week on Friday. So, and actually we're going to include part of our new group. We're going to talk about that on there. So yeah, but so one of the things when we were at the PowerShell Global Summit last April, interviewing different people, that was talked about was the difference in using PowerShell 5 and PowerShell 7. And, you know, the general consensus is use PowerShell 7. It's across the board, and that's definitely the route to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I saw it used best is, you know, a lot of the things we're going to talk tonight will apply to either, but the reality is PowerShell 5 is getting critical bug fixes, and that's about it. So all of your new development and feature set is really going towards PowerShell 7.
Yep, definitely. And it's cross-platform compatible, and that's a huge thing.
Absolutely. I think it's been interesting watching it grow, because I think starting off was a little rough, and I think they've continued to make a lot of improvements on the other platforms.
Yep.
Cool. We're at 7:05. Oh, we did just get another person, but I'll get us started on this. And I said, we're not going to have a ton of slides, but I do have a few slides, and then we're going to jump into some demos to kind of show you the things in practice. And then I'll try to pause along the way if I'm, you know, talking too fast, or if you have a question, just let me know and we'll hop into it. So let me flip this over. Intro to PowerShell. So I'm going to start off with the old sacred vow that Mick's probably seen many times at many conferences, but for people new to PowerShell, the inventor has this famous quote: "Learn PowerShell and we'll do everything we can to make it the best investment you've ever made." And that's one of kind of the driving mantras of the PowerShell crew, even as they move forward without Jeffrey at Microsoft. So you got some good guys like Jason Helmick and I forget her name, but there's some good people that are still pushing the project forward, and that's still the mantra they go by. This is sort of the high-level topics. So like mentioned earlier, we're going to, it's kind of a high-level teach to fish scenario. We're going to show you how to install PowerShell 7. We're going to install Visual Studio Code and some of those extensions that'll make your life a little bit easier in there. We're going to go over the verb-noun format of PowerShell commandments, the awesomeness of Git help, what the pipeline is, and we're going to get some real-world examples, and then we're going to wrap up with some resources. So we're going to go ahead and break into the demo. Like I said, we're going to stay out of slides as much as we can here. So first thing we're going to do, as promised, let's go install PowerShell. So we're going to go to github.com/PowerShell/PowerShell. I'll drop it in the chat here as well. And if we scroll down here under Get PowerShell, we can see that under Windows, we've got a few links here. I'm running the preview, and generally that's pretty stable for me, and it gets the new features a little bit quicker. Sometimes people do have issues with it. So, if you have a concern, go with the stable. I usually like to run the preview and then deal with the fallout if there's issues, but you're just going to click this, you're going to open it up, and once you're installed, you'll get a greeting that looks about like this. So first thing that I like to do when I'm in here is run update help, because it's going to take a minute for most people. I downloaded earlier, so it shouldn't take as long, but one of the nice things about the PowerShell prompt is instead of having to search the internet whenever you need to learn about a commandment you're trying to investigate or a module, there's a built-in get help feature that'll show you examples, and you can actually kind of churn through the options that you have. And all this will be inside of PowerShell. You don't have to comb through 20 Google articles to figure out what's relevant to what you're trying to do. I believe this is related to some customizations that I have going on, but it could also be I'm not running as admin. I bet that's what that is. So you may have to run as admin. You'll likely have to run as admin for some of these things. But to show an example, if I do get help test net connection, it'll give me the command, the syntax it's looking for, and some examples here. So the other thing I can do by, what is that? It's, yeah, examples. Now this will show me some examples. This isn't quite as helpful in this command, but some of them have some really detailed examples. I think one of them is get child item examples. So this one's fairly intricate. They have 9 examples that you can go through and sort of see how to use the command. And then they're giving you these explanations of what all these are in here. So kind of the first thing to learn there is that get help if you're not sure how to use something that you run across. And then the next thing that I wanted to pull up here, and does anybody have any questions so far? Or let me met a couple people here. But yeah, does anybody have any questions so far with get help or the installation of PowerShell? All right, so we'll move on to the next part here, and I'm gonna pull this up a little bit, and I'm gonna post this in chat as well. I can change that. I've got a high resolution monitor, so let me bump this up so you can read it a little bit better. I'll also post most of what I'm pulling up in the chat, but let me bump this resolution so it's a little bit easier to read. Let's see, is that, oh, nope, I did the wrong screen, this one. Okay, is that a little bit better, or do we need to bump up further? Okay, cool. Awesome. So I set this out just to give you a high level idea. Whenever you look at these commands, like the ones that we just ran, so we ran get help, we looked at test connection, we looked at get child item, you'll start to see a trend, and this will help you figure out the commands to look for in these modules. There's a trend of Verb-Noun, and that's the standard. And the link I sent is PowerShell actually has a list of approved verbs. So if there's a module that you're working with that you're not as familiar with, you can go in here and start to look at the approved verbs, and it might give you some ideas of things that it can do that wouldn't be obvious at first sight. And when you get much further along, you start building modules. This will give you an idea of kind of the standard of how to build out your modules and what that should look like. So the next thing to do is show one of the advantages of PowerShell over, something like Python is the pipeline. So if you look on your keyboard and weren't familiar with it before, there's a pipe key on your keyboard. And this is what you're going to use when you're working with the pipeline in PowerShell. And I'm going to go to it in just a second to explain a little bit more of that, but I wanted to show you where that key was. So we're over here on my keyboard. It's actually above the enter key, but it'll look something like this with that slash and then the pipe key there. And so
and another, just to jump in, there's another huge advantage of using PowerShell over Python, and that's the fact that PowerShell is integrated typically in the operating system if you're using PowerShell 5, whereas Python is not.
Absolutely. And I think just the ability to take those commands that you've used with the built-in Windows PowerShell and allow those carry over to PowerShell core that's now cross-platform. So I can write a script once and have it work on 3 platforms, which is really nice. So it's going to get in here. So we're talking about, we'll get into the pipeline here in a second, but one of the commands you can run is get service. And this will show you every service that stopped running or otherwise on your computer. And it's going to show the name, description, and the status. Scroll back up here. Got a little crazy with my scroll wheel there. And of course, if I take one of these services, so let's say I wanted to restart my print spooler, there's other ways you can do this that you'll learn later. But for an example, if I took my spooler service, when I pipe that over, I'm sending the output of it. So I've said get spooler service, get service spooler, which came back with this, and then I can actually pipe that over to my next command, which is restart service, and it'll restart my print spooler. So, but I can do that with any command. So if I had the Xbox service, anything that I'm pulling on the left side of the pipeline, I can send the result over the next command and chain that along multiple iterations. And of course, there's also the ability to do multiple if I really wanted to for some reason. So if I went, get service, spooler, Xbox game save, I could send those along, but I'd have to do a for each, but just as a high level example there. So clear that out here. Another thing that we can do with the pipeline, again, we're passing along the get service, and we're going to use the where command. So we've taken the output of get service and we're passing it to this where, and it's going to look for any services that starts with XB. So I know an issue a lot of people have on their corporate computers is Windows 10, Windows 11 coming with those Xbox services. And we've had them interfere with Microsoft-based VPNs before, depending on the provider. So this just dumped all the services that start with that. And then the other thing I could do, if I had a single service, I would plug this in here and say where the service is like Xbox, stop the service. You'd have to do a for each, but high level, just kind of showing that you can kind of pass these commands along through the pipeline more than once. So I took my service. If I wanted to show a better example, let me do one that's a single one. So like that, and really didn't like that for some reason. Let's see. be queried following error. Awesome. What did I do here? Name like, that's on point. Oh, it's because it's already stopped, but it did not give a friendly error there. Okay. But at a high level, that's sort of the pipeline aspect that I wanted to pass along. Is it's kind of the ability to chain the outputs from one command to the next. Does that make sense for everyone? Does anyone have any questions about that aspect? Okay. Another thing that you're going to commonly want to use is for each loop. So think of it as the ability to take a list and do an action for each one. So, for a lot of people starting out, they'll have something like get AD user, and for every AD user that's in a group, they'll want to do X to that user. They might want to add an attribute or something like that. So in our example here, we're going to take our Marvel heroes and create a list real quick. So we're going to have Iron Man. Let's see. Iron Man. I have Captain America in here. Let's do Hawkeye. One more, we'll do Spider-Man. So we've got our list of users here, and then we're going to say for each. And this value, this is a little bit confusing at first, but you're assigning the name to this value. So this could be anything that you want. Just keep track of it further in the command. So I'm going to say for each hero in Marvel heroes. And then inside of here, what action I'm going to take with each one. So we're going to write host hero. And all write host is you're going to print it to the screen. So we're saying that for each hero and Marvel heroes, write it on the screen. And that generated our list and split it out into individual. It just listed the users that we gave it, basically.
And I just want to jump in on this one.
Yeah.
Just to add one little thing. So you may hear some people and they're kind of out of date, but they'll say you shouldn't be using write host. That used to be true a long time ago. That has been resolved now. So they just didn't. It was a no at first.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I would say that's sort of a fair thing if you're kind of Googling around modules and commandlets. This isn't really a PowerShell tip, but I was talking with some of the guys at work, and I was surprised that not all of them knew this. But if I wanted to search write host and learn more about it, Google has the ability to set the time. So if I'm learning about something like PowerShell that I know constantly changes, I can set past year and get the more up-to-date guides about it. So in this case, the Evotech blog has one about writing it in colors. But yeah, that's just a side tip. I was talking to some of my guys and I was surprised that they didn't know that, but just a helpful side tip for searching anything technology, really.
Which is one of the things I've used write host a lot, because I've written a lot of tools and published them on stuff like that will check status of different processes and stuff, and then it will return, it'll like write host success, and I would want that in yellow, or a write host failure, and I wanted that in red. So any reds would stand out to me immediately. And of course, I used to be criticized a lot for using write host, but I would also argue, well, this is a big thing, being able to see visually at something that stands out if it's a failure.
Absolutely. So another thing that'll come into play here along the line of for eaches you're going to see these two symbols come up quite a bit, and a $_ and these are referencing the objects that are coming through the pipeline to your next command. So if I take something like directory, which is a PowerShell, to start as a bash command, but it comes over to PowerShell as well. So I can take my directory and for each object, and we knew that I'm going to change to a smaller directory because otherwise it's going to be noisy. So I'm going to cd over to temp. Now I'm going to run my directory command, and we're piping this to our next command. And for each object, I just want to provide the name. So I'm going to use that $_ with the name property. And that's going to come back with all the files that are in my temporary folder. So here we've sort of ran the directory command. We've passed the output of directory to the for each object command. And then specifically, we only want to see the name property of the outputs that it gave us. And so that's what we've listed there. And then another thing that you can do with the for each is we'll come back is you can kind of work with CSVs both ways, right? And one of the ways is we can import them. So I created a document earlier, and all it is a list of users, but it's something you might get from an AD report or things like that. So I can take my CSV and do the same thing. So I can say for each. So add type in there. Let me fix that. Example. In fact, I should be using Shift more. There we go. For each object. And this time we're going to use write output, which is very similar to write host, but we're going to $_. And I just want to list the first name of everybody. If I do that, I get a list of first names out of there. But you could do things like email addresses, just depending on what you're trying to pass. And again, you can pipeline more than once. So I could take my list of names that I just dumped and pipe that to a whole nother command. So you get pretty deep with some of this stuff. Can be a little bit overwhelming, but at high level, the idea is you can sort of chain these commands together with the pipeline.
And with what we're doing here, this also brings up another topic. So there's something in PowerShell called aliases. And that's exactly what we were using with saying dir, because you're used to dir in the command prompt. But actually, dir is an alias for get-child item in PowerShell.
Yeah.
So it'll get the same results, but you'll often see, and where this also comes in, and which is why I mention it. So when you pipe something, you'll a lot of times see a few letters, and you're like, "What's going on? What does this mean?" And it's a shortcut. It's an alias to trying to recall some of those. Do you happen to know, Ben, right off?
I know IXE is invoke expression is one of them. And you could do that. I'm trying to think about the other ones. I know Visual Studio Code and a lot of others will sort of flag that it's a little bit less than ideal to use the shorthand because it makes it a little bit harder to read for a lot of people, I think. And you just don't know how long the aliases are going to be around.
Yep.
And at first. So Douglas, is that question on the for each? Okay. So when you're, let me see if I had another example. So on the for each object, we didn't use this, but we're running our for each up here. We're basically defining and Mick may have a better way to describe this, but you're sort of defining how we're going to reference the item that we're pulling for each new line that we've done. So in this case, we have a list of heroes, and I'm giving it sort of a nickname. when I run through each line. So when I run through line 1, the hero was Iron Man. So for that iteration of the command, hero equaled Iron Man. The next time, hero equaled Captain America, and so on. And so we didn't really need to do that in ForEach-Object because we passed it through the pipeline is why, because we were passing that data along through the chain. But if I had to have a ForEach by itself, and you might have something like, I don't have the CSV queued up for this, but I might have something like CSV data in here, and it might look more like this. So for each employee in CSV data, we might be doing something like, change AD password or whatever that looks like.
And you're right, because one of my hardest things learning in PowerShell was piping. I really struggled with that for a long time. And instead of using piping, I would use for each statements instead. And I did that until I think it was 2016, at which I finally learned, and it clicked for me on using the pipeline. So if it's hard for you, stick with for each for the time being.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess my question was kind of really more to try to understand when I would use the parentheses versus like the braces, if that makes sense.
It does. So a little bit of that's going to depend on the commandlet, but I think you're going to use the braces much more often. The parentheses is normally when I'm defining something, and the brackets is when I'm actually trying to execute on something. But Mick may have a little bit better way to describe that, if that makes sense.
I think that's a pretty good explanation. So as you can see, like for instance, in the for each there, you'll see where he does the parentheses first, and that's where he's defining, the variables that it's going to run through, the variable with the list of items that it needs to run through, and then the variable that is going to actually contain the each item. And then basically the brackets are always used, and he's right, when in an execution part of it. So when you do, let's say, piping, so you let's say you do your get dash content, which pulls all the content from a file. And then once it gets all that content, you do a pipe after that. And so you're passing all that information to the next part of the statement there. And then you're going to do a bracket at that point, possibly. And that's how the brackets usually work.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you for the question. Feel free to, pipe in if you have any others. And I think David put it in a pretty good way as well in the chat here. So, the kind of parentheses are for the expressions, and the brackets are for the script blocks, if you want to look at it that way as well. So I'm hopping around a little bit here, but I'm going to change our scenery a little bit. So we've kind of learned some basic high-level commands here. So let's look at Visual Studio. I'm going to post the link in here. And specifically, this is Visual Studio Code that we're going to work with. So when you had Windows PowerShell, and even today you had the ISE built in, and I know a lot of people kind of learned with it, and I did as well, and it was a strong tool. But when we're working in the PowerShell 7 world, Visual Studio Code's kind of the king. There are some other tools like is it PowerShell Studio? There's some paid programs and stuff like that. But where you're getting started, for Microsoft's provided you with Visual Studio code for no cost. And so, if I go through this, next, accept, I can create a shortcut, but mostly we're nexting, nothing too crazy here. And that was, you can also go to the site. I brought you directly to it. I'll also send the main site here. I just skipped ahead a little bit there, but this is the main site, and all that first link was the download button right here. So once I'm in it, let me pull that over and let me start a new file. So one of the things that I've done with mine is installed extensions to make life a little bit easier. And there are quite a few on here. One of the ones that I use, though, is there's an extension pack by a guy named Justin. I'm going to butcher his last name, so we'll just say Justin G. And he did a talk for PowerShell.org during COVID, and he's put together this nice package that comes with the PowerShell extensions, but it also comes with a lot of other things just to make your life a little bit easier. Now, it may be a little heavy because there's a lot going on here. So if you're just getting started and the number of extensions look overwhelming, the big ones that you're going to want to get is PowerShell and let's see. I was trying to look through here. The inline values support is really nice to get feedback on that. There's Pester in there. Let me see. So yeah, I mean, if you don't do anything else, go ahead and get the PowerShell extension in there. But if you want to kind of click and get a lot of tools that are going to help your transition, the PowerShell extension pack that Justin put together is a pretty solid offering. And you kind of have the ability to go in here. So if I do, it'll try to auto detect. I usually just tell it because I'm impatient, but I can tell it that I'm working with PowerShell. And if we take some of those commands that we wrote earlier, it'll actually, with Justin's pack, sort of color them and make them a little bit easier to read in comparison to just the regular editor. And so you see I've kind of got this color differentiation of the pipeline, our brackets. And so it's really a lot easier to see kind of how things are working here, in my opinion. The other nice thing is there's sort of this built-in debugging, right? So if I go to programs, this is actually yelling at me for a different script for using IEX, funny enough. But if I go in here, I can make a typo and normally it'll yell at me. Let's see. See if I really butcher it. Normally that yells at me more.
And I'll tell you one big feature with Visual Studio Code, and this was one of the interviews we did with Jason Helmick while they were developing it, is it has artificial intelligence in it now. So as you're writing the code, it will actually figure out what is going to come next, and it will pre-populate for you as you type.
Yeah, so as I'm starting to type Import-CSV, it's predicted what I'm going to write there. If I'm like, what's that git command? I could start typing git app, and as I go along and get closer, it's going to offer all these options for me. But yeah, yes. So that's one of the big difference. And while we're talking about it, I'll pull up, slide on that real quick. So one of the big differences is that when you use Visual Studio Code, you're using PowerShell, what they call core, which in this case is PowerShell 7. So when you're working with Windows PowerShell, it would actually use the ISE, which is around. There's not really any planned upgrades or feature improvements for it. It just sorts of exists and lives on an island, but it's there for compatibility.
Biggest thing that you've got going on is a lot of companies are still they've locked down. They're not migrated to anything 7. So your 5.1 or 5.2 stuff is what you're going to find on most servers. And that's kind of the base level default. I come across a lot of government organizations that are still stuck on some servers that are like running 2008 and, or they're still on some other old platform that still has, PowerShell 3 or PowerShell 4. And that's it. You can't upgrade anything, and it's a monster. And obviously they're there because of whatever contractual reasons, but a lot of that stuff is coming to end of life and they're being forced to upgrade and move on. So that's a good thing for us.
Yeah, for sure. I was at a talk with Jason Helmlich, who's one of the program managers, and the other thing that was kind of brought up is ISE hasn't been updated in quite a while, so there's almost a time clock of at some point does it become an exploit. And I mean, I'm sure they'll get a fix out there, but kind of the longer it hangs out there, does it become a risk, especially on these older OSs. So it'll just be something to watch for. I don't think it'll be, hopefully not anytime soon, but it's something kind of watch for is just realize that ISE isn't actively updated. So that there may be a point that it's a 0 day. It's hard to say. No problem. But I kind of want to show this, and then I'm not going to get super into Visual Studio Code because there's some really good talks that like PowerShell.org has done. But to get an idea, I can sort of write my script here, and I can choose sort of the Windows PowerShell or not Windows PowerShell, the terminal instance that I have going. I can go up here at the top and click play, and I'm running my commands live in the terminal, but I'm still in my environment. And so there's sort of a easy way to go back and forth when you're developing those longer solutions for problems. Any other questions about code or comments or suggestions are also welcome. Cool. So some of the other things that I wanted to show, one of them, and this is just kind of a carryover from command prompt, but of course you can output to file with the right arrow. So if I have, let me see, if I do a get child item, I can write list of files.txt, and if I open that up, it's get content list of file. Oh, I need to put that list of files text. So that was the output of the above command stored in a text file, and I can call it later.
And just one comment there is, so when he started to type in get dash content and then the dot backslash, he could have started typing LIS and then tab, and it would have finished the whole thing off. That's a shortcut. Yeah. The other thing that you'll see in the newer versions is they're going to be a little bit hard to see on the screen, but these kind of gray suggestions. And instead of the tab, they're giving you history commands, so things that you've typed in the past, and I can right key and it'll type the command that I typed previously. Put that in there. And so let me go through. So the next thing we're going to go through a couple examples on sort of dealing with the registry and programs and things like that. So I'm going to take my command here, and this is, commonly used in batch scripts, PowerShell scripts, but we're going to grab the uninstall string registry edit. And basically we get this ugly thing that dumps down, but I'm going to format this as a table using FT for format table. And so this gives me this,
this, which is a little bit more manageable. But so I have all these uninstall screens. So the other thing that I can do is to keep in mind when these come back on a lot of modules, they're not going to show you everything that's available necessarily. So one of the things you can do is get member, because the default display may not show everything that's available to you. So when I'm looking at the registry, this is just showing me the key and the value. If I do get member, it's going to show me all the things that are available for me to look at. So there's ones for like, is it a string, what the type is, that aren't by default showing, but are down here. And so that's really valuable. Like I was working with someone who was working with the VMware module, and we were trying to figure out how to do this one task. And we were able to get the data he needed by using the get member, because by default, when he ran the command, it wasn't showing everything that was available.
Yeah, it's because when the modules are written, the guys in the PowerShell team they define what the default display is going to be, and what properties are going to be shown. So it may pull out, 50 different values, 50 different properties, but it may only show you, 4 in the beginning. Right. So you have to kind of dig deeper into it. And it depends upon what the output is. It will default to whatever they think is most relevant, most useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think VMware is a good example of that, where there's hundreds of outputs you can get on all these commands, and you only see like 4 or 5.
Yeah, and that's just the generic default of any kind of format table. Will do like 4. 4 is kind of the standard. If it has more than that, it'll just truncate down, and you start smashing.
Yep. So that we did in the format table. And again, if I like the way this looked in a table, I can pipe this to a file too. So I can type my table file to text, same deal there. I think I was going to curve and tell into a little bit though, is you can also write CSVs with this. So using our pipeline that we learned about earlier, I can take the output of a formatted table and do Export-CSV. And I'm going to go C temp uninstall.csv. And that will actually give me a CSV document, depending on what I'm trying to work with. Something like we have programs that do user imports via CSV. So if I take on my AD users to create a AD list with emails, dump it to a CSV and import it to their software, I've saved myself quite a bit of time potentially. Another one along these lines that a lot of people may not necessarily know about would be convert to HTML. So I can go with convert to HTML, and I'm going to do I'm using that arrow that I used earlier. So it took, and I've got a typo in here, fix that. So took the data that I have, piped it to HTML code inside of PowerShell, and then I can dump this to my uninstall.html. And now I have a web page with the data output like that. And you can get much fancier with that. This is sort of a, high level example. There's some, I can't remember the module. Is it PS-HTML, Mick?
I believe that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's some really advanced modules like PS-HTML, but even without any additional modules, I can do a convert to HTML and just do a quick dump of an HTML report and come out with something that doesn't look too bad.
Yeah, there's a guy at Evotech.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's the creator for that particular one. He's got some crazy stuff, but his documentation is a bit the documentation within the modules is not great. You have to read the blogs, and then sometimes you have to read several blogs to kind of understand all the functionality, because his blogging is his way of documenting, but they are very informative and very useful.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that tracks with what I've seen as well.
And actually, what you just said, Dave, brings up a really good point that I've always stressed, especially new users, is documentation when you're writing your code. I know this really dates me, but there was a great book back in the 1990s that I read as soon as I graduated college, and it was called Code Complete. And it had all the steps in there on how you should write your code. And I still follow that guide even today. And so basically what we do is you'll use a pound symbol and then say, like what he's typing right there, he tell what the next commandlet that in there is going to do. That way you can come back and read your code, because I can tell you a little story. The firm I worked at before this one, I wrote a lot of PowerShell code, and I started writing in 2011. And frankly, my code was awful. I mean, we all have to start somewhere, and
Oh yeah.
it's usable, but the person that took my place when I left that firm actually emailed me about 4 years later and said, "Hey, this has stopped working. What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, just send me the code and I'll help you." And he sent it to me, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is horrible." And so, but I had documented it, so I was able to easily figure out what it was doing. Even though the code to me, it had made absolutely no sense, but the documentation helped. And so that's why I always stress that, especially with new people and even with experienced people, they should document, because you never know who's going to read your code. And this helps them considerably.
And it will most likely be you 3
Yes.
years later when somebody goes,
Yes.
"Hey, this doesn't work anymore," and you've long forgotten what it was supposed to do and how it functioned.
Yep.
And all of those little shortcuts you took then are going to come back to bite you.
Yeah. And I mean, I think along those lines, I think everybody wants to get a point where they can kind of bang out the code on their own. I think it's very common for people to use sort of kind of mix and match scripts when they're first starting out. I think that's okay, just to get, so you can learn what's going on. But if you're gonna do that, comment where you got the script from. You don't want to be going back 40 pages ago with what you've looked at, trying to figure out where this script came from because you looked at 20 pages, figuring out how to rearrange a CSV header or something like that. So once you find your answer, comment it in your script, help yourself.
Yeah, and you may find, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the things that I was really bad about when I first started scripting was I didn't know scoping in a script, and I set all my variables all the time to global. And that was one of the things I saw in the script that he sent me that I had written. I was like, oh my God, why did I do that? But obviously I progressed a lot and realized my mistakes, and I rewrote it real quick for him. But yeah, that's a topic to come up is scoping here.
Yeah. Oh, did you have something else, Dave?
I was just going to say, like, I've run into some scenarios recently where, like, when I've gotten some stuff off of TechNet, and obviously Microsoft pulled all of that stuff from TechNet into Learn, and the source of where I've got my script no longer exists and is no longer findable on the new platform. So there's no reference to it, but at least I knew, like, who wrote it, where I got it from. And I've got some kind of history to say, because some of the people that I work with, like, and then they go like, well, did you just develop this, and where you got this? Because sometimes they don't know your credibility, and you can go, no, Lee Holmes wrote this, I'm just passing it on to you, right? And for the other guys that don't know Lee Holmes, he's a Microsoft guy, he's super genius in that regard. But this is Lee's script, it's not mine. And that's why, giving credit to the original author, like, I just configured it for your environment, but it runs fine. That will go a long way and lend into your credibility as a writer, because then at least you're giving credit where credit is due. And if something breaks, you can go like, well, I got it from here, I'll see what I can do. But this is originally a Microsoft kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you make a great point there, Dave. I mean, and that's how much of the PowerShell community is. We're always welcoming. Most of us put our stuff out there for anybody to freely use and take advantage of. And don't feel bad because other people have taken some of mine that I've published and they've enhanced it. I've done the same thing to others. Of course, I've put in my script that so-and-so wrote this, or in my blog. But usually that's a welcoming thing. If you can think of new uses of somebody else's script, do it, because it in the end, it helps everyone.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. Then, the other thing we were talking about, the Technic articles being gone. I ran into one of those, and the nice thing was, even though the live version was down, I was still able to hit up the Wayback Machine because I had the URL. So that's still made a difference there.
Yeah, and that's why I said your source may be gone when you go back to try and find out, what was it at? Because there's times where you'll pull the code down and then you'll chop it up and make it useful for what you wanted, and then you go like, I didn't save the original, so you've got no real reference for like why something worked for the original piece and then why yours doesn't.
Absolutely.
So very handy to go back.
So wanted to show just a couple more things here. So we were talking about old commands. One of the other things you can do is run git history, and this will show, I think, up to something like 4,000 of your previous commands. So if you were working on something a couple of days ago and you're like, what did I do to fix this? It didn't save the way I wanted to. You can go back, and the commands that run in your Visual Studio terminal, in your PowerShell terminal, will be in this history that you can go back through, just with the git history.
And actually, you just made a really great comment there. Terminal. There is a new PowerShell terminal out that Microsoft published. In fact, in one of our podcast episodes, we were interviewing Jason Helmick, and he gave some demonstrations on it.
Yeah. If you're kind of in the Windows 11 world, terminals is pretty strong to be able to hop around the different options, because you can integrate your WSLs, which is kind of the Linux subsystems and things like that, and kind of work out of one window, and the tabs are kind of nice. The next thing I was going to get into is a little bit of a shortcut session, but does anybody have any questions about any of the other things that we've talked about?
And I just want to make one suggestion for the ones on here that are absolutely brand new. Don't expect to get in there and start just banging away, writing scripts out. Go out there on the internet and grab other people's scripts, figure out what you're wanting to do, grab their scripts. And this is a lot of how I learned PowerShell. And I went through them, just debugged a lot through those scripts, seeing exactly what they did. And that's how, basically, I know everybody has a different learning technique, but that's how I learned it. And I just looked at different scripts that were similar to what I needed to do, and basically learn scripting that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the handy things is Mike Robbins, who used to run the Mississippi PowerShell user group. Like I said, he was recently, and I think it was like a year or two ago now. But before that, he used to do a lot of the PowerShell building and doing module configurations and how to write your own modules and stuff. And now he's working for Microsoft, doing all the learned content for exactly that stuff that he's been teaching for the past decade plus. All the little mistakes, don't do this, you should do this, and this is how to get better performance out of it. So yeah, he's got some of the best training content. And if you listen to stuff that he was saying 10 years ago, it's all now in there in the Learn documents. So you can kind of go through that step by step. So that's a really good pathway if you're getting started, to go through that content by Mike.
Absolutely. No, and I think the next point, I think my experience was similar to that. You sort of learn, like, I think one of the best ways to learn is finding those use cases that are applicable, right? Like if I just write something that someone else is doing, it doesn't have the same impact than if I don't have to do that AD change every day manually, and I just run a script to do it. Do the things that are applicable to you and that you can be passionate about, and you'll go a lot further.
Yep. Yeah, it's got to be useful. You got to use it.
So a little bit on these shortcuts here. The first one that I show, and I'm gonna put in the chat here. If you're in PowerShell, PowerShell 7, Ctrl+Alt+Shift +sign gives you all the keyboard shortcuts for the terminal. So we go here, we got quite a few here, but some of the high level ones here, if I start typing Git, I can do Ctrl+Shift or is that Control space. It'll show you all the possibilities. Obviously with Git, that's quite a few, but if I start something like Git C and then Control space, it gives me this interface where I can kind of tab, where I can kind of use my left right now keys to go through here. And for me, it's a little bit easier than the tab because I can see everything at once and select exactly what I'm trying to go into. So I could do like a Git credential and prompt for a credential. The next one is, and I've made this mistake along. So let's say I take one of these long commands up here, and I forget to use this one all the time. You know, if I'm trying to edit, like if I made a mistake way over here at M, I can press left key and go all the way over here, or I can press Control, right, and left and skip through the sections. And it's smart enough to know where the next section is, so I don't have to just hold the key down. It may be a little bit hard to see, but I can skip from item property. Now I'm H key. It's almost like a tab through these sections to quickly get where I need to go to make any corrections. And of course, we already talked about tab. And then the other thing that we skipped ahead a little bit earlier was that the history with the right arrow. So like I just ran this command, you'll see it in sort of it'll probably be difficult to see, but a gray text here that it's predicting based on my history, what I might want to type. And I just hit the right arrow key and it types it all out for me. And then let's say I wanted to clear my screen, but I've got this long command in here. I can do a Ctrl+L and clear the screen as well. I think that's mostly what I covered. I had a couple edge cases, but I think we're right around an hour. So I don't want to eat up all the time here. Does anybody else have any questions or talk about, like I said, we're talking, I forgot the most important part. Hang on. Got us ahead of myself here. So we're going to go back into the slides for just a second here. We got through the demo, we got through the pipeline, and we're going to talk about where to get help. So we got the get help command earlier, but there's going to be something when you're getting super crazy deep into something where you're going to need a little bit of help, a little bit past this. And some of the sites you can go to, I really like the R PowerShell on Reddit. There's the PowerShell.org forums, and there's the PowerShell Discord. And there's a lot of really helpful people on there. I think a way to sort of help you be successful in that is, I think sometimes people will come and like, how do I do X? And I think that's really a high level of threshold for people to help with. So go ahead and take a stab at it and then come to them once, you've ran into an issue. But I think we have a really good community, but like I said, I would say, go ahead and take a stab at it. And then when you run into errors, bring it to these guys and they're happy to chip in and help. And then sort of the helpful blogs, FeedSpot has a best PowerShell blogs. And so they've got all across the board, anything you can kind of think of in relation to PowerShell. Mick's got the Facebook group here. That's another great one. So on the blogs, you get the best PowerShell blogs with FeedSpot. I get a lot of value out of Automator. Mick's got a lot of great content on his as well. And then, as Dave mentioned, I think Evotech can be a little bit hard to read sometimes if you don't have the blog articles, but he's got a lot of really good examples of, well, not good examples of documentation, but I frequently run into use cases for his type of content.
Yeah. Was it I guess last week? I spoke with Mike Kanakis from the Research Triangle PowerShell, and he's reaching out to Evotech, Mad Boy, to basically he's going to start helping with his documentation, like the internal PowerShell module documentation itself, to try and build that up, just because it's like the guy's awesomely phenomenal with what he's creating, but Mike's kind of like, his documentation needs some help. So he's going to reach out to try and help boost that up, just because, like I said, the guy creates some great stuff, and when I can't imagine how many hours he spends trying to get that to work so well. But yeah, so there is help coming in that regard.
Yeah.
And I would say that if anybody getting started in something, maybe that's the best way to, if you want to help out somebody else in that regard, just kind of go through and help clean up documentation and learn how they're doing it, right?
Yeah, I mean, go out there and, one of the high in demand skills is someone who can use Git control. So go on YouTube, there's a PowerShell.org video on using Git with PowerShell, and learn how to commit the changes and use the Git system and contribute to these products and be active in the community like that. There's a need for documentation. You don't have to be the expert code, writer. Just figure out how to use the tools and document it in a way that's going to make sense to the population. I think it's very easy to, especially for myself, like write a module and I'm like, this makes sense the way it is. And then somebody uses it and they're like, this doesn't make sense at all. So if you're able to write documentation and help bridge that gap, I think that's super valuable.
And you make a good point there. Another thing that you're going to run into, especially if you start publishing code and putting it out there, is a lot of people that are new to PowerShell just expect when they grab the code, it's just going to run. And that's not the case. There's a lot of the tools that I've written and published that I put disclaimers in and say, hey, it works in the environment I'm in, but it's likely will need some modification to work in your environment. And I've had some people really get angry with me because, frankly, I don't have a lot of time to devote to helping people debug it. But it's something that a lot of times you don't want to take it if you don't know how to use it. I mean, obviously, start learning, but sometimes you might want to get some help helping to augment it to work in your environment.
And I do think it's important to have a safe environment to fail, right? So don't go grab something off the internet and the first time you run it against your production SQL server or something like that. Like, create your safe environment for yourself to make sure it's doing what you expect it to do.
Absolutely, because at the first Microsoft, no, I take it back. It was the second Microsoft Ignite I went to. There was a person that had a really popular blog. I'm not going to mention names, and he put a tool out there as just showing, hey, this will work. Well, the tool helped wipe a system, and somebody took it and they actually ran it, and he had put a disclaimer in there, do not run this in production. And they did, and it wiped the tables on, and of course wiped the server out. So yes, definitely have disclaimers out there on that. And you're right, have a test environment to run these things on.
Yeah, if all you have is one computer, most of the modern systems in the past, I mean, I'd say most of them in the last 10 years can run Hyper-V on Windows 10 or Windows 11. You can hop into your control panel, go to programs and features, and turn Windows features on and turn on Hyper-V, and you've got a hypervisor on your computer to run VMs that you can really explode with whatever customizations. As far as licensing, you don't have to go out and buy a bunch of expensive licenses. Microsoft has given you 180 days to play with most of their products with no costs in mind. Last few resources here. Mick posted the community call that happens once a month. I think the next one was it the 14th or no, I think it's the 17th.
It's the third, isn't it the third? I'm trying to recall. I've got it set in my Outlook. I believe it's the third
Yeah.
Thursday of every month.
Yeah. And you get, you can hop on there and you'll actually get updates from people on the PowerShell development team, like Jason and the others that work on the product day to day. You'll get the sort of latest updates that are out there. I kind of put this tool in here because I think, especially as I was learning more about kind of the conditional statements to registry edits and things like that, I found this tool helpful. So I was going to share it. I've had a lot of cases where I'll have vendors that, for whatever reason, they have this application and then they still want you to make registry edits after the fact. And so I like to turn it into reusable PowerShell that I can run against more than one system. So for example, if Corsair had these really weird registry edits that need to go everywhere, I can take an export to a .reg file, just plop it on my desktop here. And if I open this reg file in Notepad or another editor, either way, here we'll open it with code. You'll see the sort of registry editor values that you would normally, after you export, you could import it in the GUI and you'd be just fine. But I can take these and plug them into the reg to PS tool, and it'll actually spit out valid PowerShell code to create the keys if they don't exist and create the strings and make sure they're set to the right values. And you can plug this into your if statements and things like that. And you just get this spit out by Roger to do all the work for you.
That's awesome. That is something I did not know existed. And being in configuration manager world, I deal with registries a lot, getting uninstall keys.
Yeah. So, this makes sure the key exists and then it does all the strings. And yeah, it's saved me a ton of time over the years. It's like, yeah, I could write this out and autocomplete is nice, but this, I just dump the key that I want to replicate and it does everything else. Yeah, I think, the last thing I was going to show, is it Karma? Probably going to work this up. Yeah. So the last thing on your PowerShell journey is there is a module called PS Koans, and it is actually a module for learning PowerShell. And they'll give you these challenges built in and help you learn it as show karma. That's what it is. It's not get karma. So if I go in here and click show karma, it gives me these challenges. And like the first challenge it gets, it's saying that we're looking at a certain file and it expects true but got null. So I believe it is meditate. Is that right? Yeah, meditate. It'll plop me into Visual Studio Code with this challenge. And I'm going to help you cheap here. On the first challenge, it expects this to be true. So we're going to change it to true. And that'll fulfill the first challenge because it just wants you to know how to check if a value is true or not. So when I run show meditate again, it's got my first assertion done. And there's, at this point, it looks like 682 challenges that you can go through and kind of learn a little bit more. Some examples, if you're like, you don't have I'd be surprised if you don't have a use case for PowerShell, but if you're like, I'm pigeonholing this help desk role and they don't give me access to anything, this will give you some ideas and some challenges to play with. And I'll put that in the chat as well. Yeah, other than that, that is most of what I got. I hope that I was able to provide a little bit of something for most people, but just kind of a high level, here's how to get started and how to look for help. And I think we'll build onto this with some other sessions, but I just wanted to be kind of super high level and get us started off here. And
one thing that Ben was talking about was real world applications on this. I got started, just to give you a little history of me, I got started scripting back in 2003, back in the days of VB script. I was a tier 3 help desk back in that time, and I obviously had tier 1 and 2 that sent stuff up to me. And I got tired of receiving tickets saying this, and this has been done. They still can't log in to this specific app. And I would go through advanced troubleshooting only to find out the original steps had never actually been done. And so I got started into scripting. I thought there's got to be a way I can make sure that they are doing their troubleshooting. And then scripting dawned on me, and I started writing different scripts in VB script, learning how to do that, and saying, if you run into this problem, run the script. And then I had it place markers on in the registry. And then I knew when it got to me, I could look at the registry and see, okay, have these been run? And so that's some real world stuff. And so like if you have a help desk and you have specific problems or specific settings that need to be set, you can write scripts and say, just run these.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I've definitely run into a fair bit of that as well. And I think there's also, like, you know, when you talk about your perceived value to the company, you know, when there's an issue and you're hopping in and you pull up the PowerShell, there's a comment someone made at one of the PowerShell conferences. It's like, the Linux guys make the big bucks because the boss walks in and they're typing away at the terminal. And he's like, I'd never be able to do that. But, you know, there's runs of basic commands. So, you know, try to do your basic things in PowerShell and kind of up your game there.
And PowerShell is a very, very valuable skill to have. The difference in what you can earn not knowing PowerShell and what you can earn knowing PowerShell is dramatic.
Well, it's about time, right?
Yep.
Because you save yourself so much time. And
Exactly.
you gotta find where that cutover is, whether it's faster to do something in the GUI, or to spend the time developing a PowerShell script to do such a simple task. But if you're doing it over and over and over and over and over, then it's well worth it. So if you got to do it 100 times a year, right, develop a script and then just run the script, right, rather than trying to go into the GUI and just go click, 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 because at least that's like definitive. Because once you get in a rush, you're less likely to make a mistake typing in that PowerShell command and just, or, you know, whatever little script say, run the script, bang, double click, you know, go. And then you are, if you're trying to go into GUI and you go click, 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 I clicked the wrong button, oh my God. Yeah.
And to that point, it also becomes your documentation, right? So when I'm spinning up new servers, I use PowerShell, and then I dump the output and log that in my notes. These are the commands we ran to set up the server. So, you know, there's an old saying to treat your servers like cows, not pets, like cow, not pets. And, you know, if this server dies in 3 months, how long does it take you to rebuild it if you don't know what you had to do to set it up?
Oh, yeah.
Which there's and this is for a much more advanced, but there is a thing called desired state configuration when building Windows servers, and it's partially PowerShell, and it basically is used to set these servers in a desired state, desired functions on them. So basically building them up so that they're always consistent across the board.
For sure. Cool. Does anyone else have any questions about the topics we covered or about anything really? Just shout them out if you got them. Cool. I think that's most of what let's see. You tell VS Code to use PS7 if it's using 5. My understanding, and Mick, correct me on this, I don't think VS Code uses 5. It's always going to use core. Is there a case where it wouldn't?
Frankly, I never use VS Code.
Okay.
I use PowerShell Studio. The firm I'm at pays for that.
That's nice.
But I think you're right. Yeah, I love PowerShell Studio. It's not cheap. It's about it's $400 up front, and then it's about a $200 per year service cost. it's a fantastic tool once you get to really know PowerShell. But I think you're right, Ben. I think it's only does PowerShell 7.
Nope. You can use 5.1. You just have
Okay.
to change the language. So if you pull it
Okay.
up,
Yeah, let me
Okay.
pull it back up. Is it just go back to share
it's on the right hand
screen.
side normally.
Yeah, the bottom right there. So is this right here? I'm guessing this is, or which part are you talking about?
Yeah, so you can change it in a couple of different places, right? Obviously, kind of moved it. So if you write down at the bottom where it says PowerShell and braces, oh wait,
Or
yeah,
is
oh,
it?
it did say it, but yeah, you can change there,
Okay.
and that'll change the PowerShell version that you're using. I think you right click on that. Let me pull mine open.
I may not. I wonder if there's because I think you can have like PowerShell's an extension. I wonder if there's a Windows PowerShell extension or something like that. That I'm on the preview version, so that may be a little bit different too.
Oh, where did it go? Ah, that's where it's at. Dang it, it keeps moving. Stop moving.
I mean, if you have it pulled up, I think you can share your screen, or I can give you permission to, or we can point it out here either way.
Let me just find it right before. Problems output. Been a while since I've had to change languages. See, that's the language, but the actual version. Extension. No, done it, man.
And I was just going to mention while you're looking that up,
Yeah.
I was just going to mention to everybody. So my co-host and I, Harjit Dalwal and I, we do the PowerShell News podcast. As I said earlier, we hadn't done any in a few months. We've both been just swamped, and so we're getting it started this week. And so there's somebody here mentioned the other podcast, the PowerShell podcast. There's a difference. The PowerShell podcast goes into much more detail than ours does. They'll interview somebody typically, and it's usually like an hour long. We basically cover the main topics, the main news, what's going on in the PowerShell community. It's typically about a 15-20 minute podcast. And it's just an overview of everything. We give the references of the latest news on it. So that's mainly what the PowerShell News podcast is.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the listen. I think I'm a little bit behind, but I remember some of the ones where you guys were at Ignite, and some of those that were really good.
Now those of course are different. When we're at
Yeah.
a conference speaking, I mean they're usually a lot longer.
Oh, I know why.
But on typical they're about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I know why I can't do it on mine, because I don't have 7 installed on this new laptop yet. But you should be able. Typically, like if you right click on that PowerShell, yeah, one of those, right, and then it would have the language selection, just like the version selection.
I mean, I imagine like this says, I'm gonna guess this is the 5.1 issue. Let's see, is it PS version table? Yeah, even
So you
on
got
this one, I'm 7.4. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know this is 7 because it's the PWSH.
Yep. Yeah, so it's whatever PowerShell version you have installed, and so if you have 5.1 and 7, then it'll give you the options to be able to switch between the two. And I do that kind of often where I'm developing new stuff. I will write it for 7 unless I have to write it for 5.1. And then in my scripts, I tried to specify which version that I was writing it for, just in case, like I'm using a version 7 and then the commandlets for that don't function on that system. And you go, why isn't it working? It worked on this system. It's because your PowerShell version is different, or the underlying PowerShell that's installed on the system that you're trying to work with isn't there.
Yeah,
So
you're
checking your
right.
assumptions.
You can specify the minimum version for it to run on too.
Yep.
In the script.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
possible to change the different versions, to select a different version. So if you're running 6 or something, whatever for your environment, you can select that code.
Pretty cool. Yeah, I think you can do it in the JSON. I know there's another way. I'll get clarification on that, and I'll send an email as well just to follow up on that. Cool. Yeah, around 8:20. If nobody's got anything else, I know Mick's gonna have a night ahead of him, it sounds like. So
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I haven't been called, so it doesn't look like
here's hoping.
anything actually happened. Thankfully.
Absolutely. Yeah, does this while I've got everybody, does this time slot work well for most people, kind of this second Wednesday of the month?
Yeah, works for me. Right, doing my normal work hours.
Cool. Well, yeah, we'll shoot out another invite for next month and kind of continue our intro trend, maybe switch it up on who presents. We'll see. It's depending on availability, but yeah, we'll continue kind of the intro trend and go from there. And if you have any other topics, post them on the meetup group or send us an email, and we'll see if we can, there's a lot of presenters out there that are happy to share the groups out here. So if there's a certain topic you want covered, let us know. We'll try to find, the experts out there. Cool. Thanks, guys. If I don't have anything else, we'll close it out.
No worries. You guys have a good night.
Thanks,
You
you
too.
too. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.